everybody, what's going on? Hell Knight here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to kind of do a retrospective on the mid-season because I did still want to address a lot of these player pain points that people are having with saying a lot of things like, oh, this season has been, so bad and damage creep and all these problems. And I wanted to kind of look back and say, why has this season been such a big deal to people? And kind of think about how, how changes might be made and how Riot can maybe do things better next time. So first, I wanted to preface this by talking about preseason, because obviously that had the release of Runes Reforged, which was a brand new way to play the game. Old runes were gone. You could no longer take, for example, 12 flat MR in order to have a slight advantage in a lane against a AP heavy poke champion or something thereof. Instead, you had none of those options and a bunch of brand new options. Now, I think Runes Reforged is overall a better decision for the game. I think it's a lot more intuitive. I think it makes a lot more sense, and it's a lot more fun than saying, oh, well, I have 12 flat armor on my page. Instead, you can say something like, I took Mirror Shell, or I took Iron Skin, or something along those lines. Those aren't in the game anymore, but something along those lines. So I do think that was a good change, but it was a very disruptive change, and it took a long time for Riot to kind of iron out some of the kinks with the system and make it so that some runes are worth it, some runes aren't, and as opposed to old runes, which hadn't been balance changed in probably a couple of years at least, this new rune system needed a lot of constant tweaking back and forth, and I think that kind of is the start of where player dissatisfaction currently rests, I would say, is the fact that people are just very dissatisfied with the current state of the game, just based off of this, because they are very, very much so already saying, well, this has been a very disruptive season already. Fast forward to mid-season, which is primarily what I wanted to talk about today. Instead of one big patch like Riot have done in the past, we've seen it previously with the Assassin rework, the Tank rework, the Mage rework, which came with the Elemental Drakes as well, whole bunch of stuff like that. Instead, mid-season was strung out over about 2 months, I wanted to say, 2.5 months or so. And this included a lot of really important changes. We had the Marksman itemization overhaul and their nerfs. We had the Mage mana update to make it less about wave clearing. We had jungle changes. We had minion worth and bounty tweaks. We had the more changes to runes to help make some of them better, some of them worse, so on and so forth. But so there were lots of big changes, but were spread out over a decent chunk of time. Now, ostensibly, on paper, this looks like a great idea. Instead of dropping a giant patch on players and saying, adapt to all of this at the same time, the idea was spread it out, make it less disruptive. However, this did kind of backfire on Riot because instead of having just one big patch and then basically saying, all right, players, you can now have a lot of time to adjust to this patch, they essentially said, first adjust to this patch, then adjust to this patch, then adjust to this patch, then adjust to this patch. And it got really, really hard for players to just keep track of everything and make it into a better position. And now you might be saying, well, this is totally fine. Players do this already every 2 weeks, right? Puts out another patch. They do, but those patches are generally lighter. They usually don't have many huge changes. For the most part, they're just kind of champion buffs, nerfs, item buffs, nerfs, maybe a couple of rune things, but usually nothing substantial. Maybe you'll get a couple of minor champion reworks like the Ari rework that happened earlier this year where she got the damage amp on the charm back and that sort of thing. Yeah, you kind of get those changes and it kind of works out and it's not so bad. But this patch was patch after patch of giant changes, and on top of this, we also had champion reworks and releases continuing at the same time. So this isn't even just get used to Marksman itemization update, this is also get used to playing against Pyke now, because he's in the game. And that's a lot to hand off on players, and especially when they hadn't even gotten used to things like the jungle settle changes or the mage mana changes in the mid lane, all that kind of thing. And what that eventually ended up doing is that it was an overwhelming amount of change, and I think that's where a lot of the complaints for players ended up coming from, because there was too much change. Players felt like we had to relearn the game after every patch, instead of just kind of saying, well, we know there's going to be a huge patch in the mid-season, just brace yourself for it, and that way when it comes out, you know it's going to be weird for probably the next month or so, but then things will steady out. Didn't end up happening. Instead, unfortunately, what ended up happening is that we had this huge period of tremendous change spread out, and there was no way to brace yourself for every single patch without just getting tired and exhausted and saying, okay, now what do I have to learn? And I think that's primarily what's led to high player frustration and calls for fewer changes. You might have already seen Double If's video talking about that. If you haven't, I'll have that linked in the description below. But essentially his point is that lots of change isn't necessarily good for a game, especially not a game that has aspirations to be professional, because there's just too much change for people to get a handle on too quickly. It dramatically overhauls things. It's bad for pros because they don't have time to stream or produce content anymore for their fans because they're too busy scrimming all the time just to get used to the changes and figure out, okay, well, what's good, what's bad? We have no idea because it's been 2.5 months of nonstop change. And I think that the way Riot handled the midseason is primarily the cause of this sort of dissatisfaction and frustration. Now, I don't necessarily think that the changes made in midseason were bad. In fact, I think they were pretty good because you had jungle pressure. Beforehand, you had jungle pressure was way too high. It felt like better jungler won, and I remember that was a meme for a couple of months prior to the changes. Marksmen were still incredibly strong. The second they got their Infinity Edge and a Zeal item, they were just the best character on your team, regardless of how well they were doing. And they didn't have the late game fantasy. They were basically just at all times fantasy. Riot wanted to give players a better chance to snowball, so if you did get a lead as a top laner like Kled or Urgot, you had a better chance of doing that. So I think a lot of these changes were good, and I think they needed to be in the game. I think the biggest problem with them, though, is that because they came so rapid fire, so one after another, players couldn't even point a finger about what they hated because there was too much change, and they couldn't say exactly what they disliked. If Riot had just done the marksman change, for example, players might say, well, this really sucks now that I can't play, my favorite champion Tristana anymore because she feels so weak, and I dislike how there are all these bruisers now in the bot lane. But there are also things that people could have been talking about that were good. I like that I can play Vladimir in the bottom lane now. That's fun for me to do. But because there were so many changes, all players could really do is say, everything feels bad and I don't know what's going on. I just know I don't like it. So I think that's a big reason behind the dissatisfaction. And so the other thing is that League is a game about constant change. That's one of Riot's design tenets. That's one thing that they have been focusing on. It's one thing that's always been a constant about League of Legends. You know there's going to be change. You know things are going to get added. Things are going to be removed. Things are going to get reworked. Plenty of stuff is going to change about League. In fact, the Aatrox rework, I think, wouldn't have even made as big of a deal if it hadn't come during a time of so much change. Because we were all braced for it, but after change, well, now the Aatrox rework on top of that, man, I just want to play the game and not feel like I need to relearn something. And I think that's the biggest complaint players have, is they just are tired of relearning. And so that's the biggest takeaway I think I can make for Riot going forward, and just to kind of address player concerns. I don't think a lot of the changes they're that upset about. I think the biggest thing they're upset about is just that they're done with the game changing and they want it to stay the same for at least a little bit. So at the end of the day, where are we? Where are we kind of in the game? Obviously, players are upset. I think that's starting to come down. I think once we have the next couple of patches, which will have very few changes, I think people will be a lot more adjusted, a lot more reasonable, a lot less likely to be calling for jobs and complaining about things. But I do think that Riot has things that they need to work on and focus on. First up, Riot need to have some follow-ups balance work. Obviously, they need to address all of the big changes we had over the extended mid-season patch, and I think that they need to be balancing some of these, ironing some of the kinks out, making it so that crit marksmen feel like they can play the game, making it so that potentially bruisers bot aren't always the right answer, changing the jungle so early game junglers feel like they can exist again, those sorts of things. They definitely need to do some follow-up balance work, but I don't think any of it needs to be a huge change. In fact, they've basically announced we are not going to do a single big patch for the rest of the year, which I think is a great decision on their part. And I think that as these smaller patches come out, there are a lot more people will kind of settle down and say, okay, I can play the game. It's not that big of a deal. Things are back to where they should be before. Obviously, the systemic changes they made are awesome. Having a more diverse mid lane, having a more diverse bot lane, reducing jungle pressure, all that's great, but they need to do some follow-up on it. Finally, I think that if you hold off on the large-scale changes until next preseason, if that, I think, like I said, you'll have a lot more time to adjust, and I think, in general, player dissatisfaction will go down. Now, obviously, there will always be some people who will hate the changes no matter what. That is just in the nature of change. I still hate the Mordekaiser rework, for example, even though I know a lot of players, especially his mains, have kind of gotten used to it and even like it to a certain extent. So there will definitely still be people who hate aspects of midseason, but I think for the most part, as time goes on, I think there will be a lot more people saying, yeah, okay, there were some good changes about midseason made. So basically, if you're watching this and you're dissatisfied with the current state of League of Legends, I urge you, patience. give it the next couple of months, see if things can change around, see if we can get it back to where things were before. And if you don't have to relearn the game for 2.5 months, see how you're enjoying the game at that point, as opposed to immediately saying everything is bad and Riot should feel bad. So, but that's just my opinion. Go ahead and let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below, especially if you think I'm full of crap. No, Riot have been in the shitter since the beginning of the season, and they were in the crapper from the beginning of last season, and things are terrible. Let me know. Tell me the reasons why you think the game is in such a bad state. I would love to hear them in the comments. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave a like. And if you really enjoyed the video, go ahead and think about subscribing. Upload an article just about each and every... Wow, I'm way messing up my outro today. If you enjoy the video, consider subscribing. I upload an article or a video Mondays, Fridays, and on patch notes as well. And if you're looking for Grab the Lantern content, you can check out my blog. That's where the articles are being uploaded just about each and every single day for your enjoyment. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.